If you open your copy of Hogwarts: A History, you'll learn that the school was founded in the 10th century. But what you won't find is why Hogwarts is located deep in the Scottish Highlands. After researching more about that period in history, I think I may have the answer. Accio Aeterni, a trustworthy muggle in the wizarding world. Most people probably assume Hogwarts is in such a remote area because they needed to be able to hide from muggles and keep the school a secret. But I'm not buying it. The Statute of Secrecy, which required the concealment of magic in magical communities, wasn't implemented until 1692. So, theoretically, there wasn't any need to keep the school a secret for roughly the first 700 years of existence. So maybe you're thinking, why not build Hogwarts in London? London already includes Diagon Alley, Platform 9 3/4, and the Hogwarts Express, St. Mungo's, and of course, the Ministry of Magic. Put all of these together and you easily have more people and probably more square footage than the Hogwarts castle, so it shouldn't have been hard to hide a castle either. And only one of the 4 founders came from Scotland, so it's unlikely they would have all met in Scotland and chosen that location that they all knew so well. Godric Gryffindor lived in what would later be known as Godric's Hollow, located in West England. Salazar Slytherin likely lived near Little Hangleton, which is where the Gaunts lived in southeastern England. Helga Hufflepuff is described as living in a broad valley, which is likely the Broad Valleys of Wales. And then Rowena Ravenclaw, who did actually come from Scotland, or Glen as the Sorting Hat says in Chapter 12 of the Goblet of Fire. But it is more likely that all 4 of them met in a more populated city like London or Winchester. So why then is Hogwarts located way out in Scotland? Well, think about the timing. What was happening during the 10th century? Well, from about 750 to 1050 AD, Northern Europe was in the Viking Age. And during this time, Vikings were attacking England, Ireland, and mainland Europe. But surprisingly, according to these maps, Scotland was left largely untouched. Now, Rowena Ravenclaw dreamt that a warty hog was leading her to a cliff by the lake, and that is how the location for Hogwarts was chosen. But I believe there was more to the story than that. She didn't have this dream in a vacuum. She and her friends were likely already well along in their plans for founding a school, and as the wisest of the group, she certainly was aware of all the dangers of starting a school as well. It is my belief that through the dream or not, Hogwarts was established in Scotland because the founders were afraid of the Vikings and wanted their students as far away from them as possible. Now, why would the 4 greatest witches and wizards of their day be afraid of the Vikings? Vikings were fearsome warriors, but it's not like they were wizards. Were they? Yes, I believe they were. The Vikings were warriors primarily from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, and these Norsemen had an interesting mythology. For instance, the leader of their gods and father of all beings was named Odin the Allfather. He is the god of wisdom, poetry, and magic. Can you think of other wise poetic wizards? Though magic isn't the first thing people associate with Odin, he had powerful abilities. He could transform himself into animals, just like the Animagi. He also often disguised himself to appear as others, as if he drank a polyjuice potion. In the Poetic Edda, a collection of Old Norse poems, we learn a lot more about Odin's relationship with magic. He's called the father of magic, and in one instance he spoke mighty charms to a wise woman to call her up from the dead to know the meaning of his son's evil dreams. The Poetic Edda and Norse mythology in general also highlights a strong connection between runes and the Vikings. Odin famously hanged himself on a tree as an offering in order to obtain the power of the runes, and the Vikings who worshipped him famously carved runes into rocks. Some suspect this was an ancient form of social media to communicate, but it could have also been a way to channel their magic. But what was this ancient form of magic? It was clearly very valuable to Odin for him to sacrifice himself. We get a glimpse in the Havamal, which lists 18 different charms or spells. These spells, or magic songs as Odin refers to them, are not given, but he does talk about what they can do, which range anywhere from helping in sorrow and sickness to aiding one in battle. Since the Vikings were such fierce warriors, these runes probably contributed greatly to their success. and whether it was immediately after the founding of Hogwarts or sometime later, the headmaster or headmistress of the school must have realized its value to the Vikings and decided to offer an ancient runes class to the students, which is still taught today. And where the Vikings would eventually learn to hone their magic was Durmstrang. Since Odin was the god of magic, perhaps he gave the Vikings their first taste of magical abilities. However, if the Vikings got wind of 4 great witches and wizards establishing their own magical school, I think that the Vikings would have soon followed. Durmstrang has been around since the beginning of the Triwizard Tournament, which began around 1294, after the Viking Age came to an end. However, its location has remained a secret. At the Yule Ball, Headmaster Karkaroff told Krum, "Don't go giving away anything else now, or your charming friend will know exactly where to find us." This was after Krum told Hermione that the castle was not as big as Hogwarts nor as comfortable. They have only 4 floors and fires that are lit only for magical purposes, but the grounds are even larger than Hogwarts. In the summer, they fly every day over the lakes and the mountains. I always assumed that Durmstrang was located somewhere in Russia because the movies show the students wearing ushankas, and Professor Karkaroff sounds a lot like a vodka. However, back in December of 2000, J.K. Rowling stated that Durmstrang was located in the remote northern regions of Norway or Sweden. This leads me to believe that as the Viking Age came to a close, the Vikings realized that their brute strength, potentially augmented by limited magic, was not enough to conquer the world, and the wizards of the group needed to establish their own magical school. At any rate, the Vikings clearly inspired J.K. Rowling as she developed the Harry Potter series. The most obvious example is Fenrir Greyback, the werewolf who bit Professor Lupin and served Voldemort during the Second Wizarding War. The name Fenrir comes from the great wolf and son of Loki, who is destined to defeat Odin during Ragnarok. And, as alluded to earlier, I believe that Dumbledore was inspired by Odin, or at the very least Gandalf, who was clearly inspired by Odin. J.R.R. Tolkien took a lot of inspiration from Norse mythology in his Lord of the Rings series, even borrowing the name Gandalf from Norse mythology. And I think Dumbledore is a good representation of wisdom, poetry, and magic, albeit not a direct copy. I also believe that the Great Hall was modeled after Viking longhouses. Longhouses were the place to be. Not only did they host parties and meals, but they also served as areas for discussion and rest. Many individuals would sleep together in a longhouse, and they were all constructed with one main focal point where the leader would sit. This is very similar to the Hogwarts Great Hall, where Dumbledore's seat is the focal point of the room as he presides over the hall. This is where he makes major announcements, where they host meals and dances, and even where the students sleep in dire circumstances, such as when Sirius Black broke into the castle in Harry's 3rd year. And though they aren't specifically related to Norse mythology, 2 of the first dragons we see in the Harry Potter series are Scandinavian: the Norwegian Ridgeback and the Swedish Shortsnout. So, what do you think? Did Rowena Ravenclaw just dream up a random location for Hogwarts? Or were the founders already having discussions about picking an isolated location to avoid Viking attacks? Or better yet, do you have any theories yourself? Let me know in the comments. Either way, I think we can all appreciate the sprawling beauty of the Scottish Highlands and are glad that the castle didn't get destroyed by angry Vikings.